The year was 2023, and the world was in flux. Amid a storm of artificial intelligence, climate crises, and identity confusion, a young professor named Elias Ward found himself spiraling into an existential vacuum. His days were filled with lectures on ancient texts and comparative religions at a small university in Massachusetts. Yet his nights were haunted by a singular question: what if everything we know about the Bible is just the surface? Elias was not a man of shallow wonder. Since childhood, he'd been drawn to sacred texts, not out of devotion, but curiosity, almost as if something ancient within him was reaching forward through time. He had read the Bible 100 times, but not until now did he begin to see the spaces between the lines. The strange patterns, the recurring numbers, and the symbols that seemed misplaced but persistent. One night, while sorting through a box of old manuscripts inherited from his late grandfather, a theologian and secret Freemason, he stumbled upon a leather-bound journal titled The Blueprint of God, Decoding the Sacred Cipher. The cover was cracked with age, but the ink inside glowed faintly as if resisting the wear of time. Within its pages were references to biblical verses that had been deliberately mistranslated. Symbols cross-referenced with Sumerian tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Kabbalistic geometry. But one phrase, written in Hebrew, kept appearing: Tavnit Elohim, the divine blueprint. The journal spoke of a hidden code embedded in the Bible, not meant for priests or scholars, but for those with eyes to see. This code, the writer insisted, was the key to understanding not only the creation of the universe but the spiritual architecture of human life. Purpose and destiny. Elias felt a spark, a call. He didn't know where the path would lead, but something deep inside whispered, follow the symbols. That night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Elias opened the book of Genesis, not to read the story of creation, but to see it with new eyes. It was then he noticed it. The 7 days of creation were not just a sequence, they were a pattern, a blueprint, a design, and so began a journey that would take him across continents, through ancient ruins, secret societies, forbidden scrolls, and even visions beyond time itself, all in pursuit of the hidden knowledge encrypted in the most read, most misunderstood book in history. This wasn't just a quest for truth, it was the decoding of human existence itself. Elias sat at his desk, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows over the ancient journal. The phrase, Tavnit Elohim, the divine blueprint, echoed in his mind like a chant. Tugging at something primal within him, he took a deep breath, flipped to the first page of Genesis, and began to map the verses. Not as narrative, but as data, lines, numbers, and sequence. He wrote on a fresh sheet of paper: Day 1 light, separation of darkness. Day 2 sky, separation of waters. Day 3 land and vegetation. Day 4 sun, moon, and stars. Day 5 birds and sea creatures. Day 6 animals and mankind. Day 7 rest. Each day, a function. Each function, a layer. It felt intentional. And then it struck him, the Fibonacci sequence. He had seen this pattern in art, music, and architecture. Could it be embedded here, too? He overlaid the creation days with the Fibonacci spiral and saw an uncanny resemblance, the progression of complexity, the symmetry of balance, the growth from void to man. But the moment that truly shattered his worldview came when he traced the Hebrew letters of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There were 7 words in that verse. There were 28 letters in Hebrew, and 28 was 7 multiplied by 4. 4 was the biblical number of creation. 7, the number of divine completeness. It wasn't just poetic, it was mathematical. He stared at the verse, then recalled what his grandfather used to say: God doesn't just speak in words, Elias, he speaks in numbers, geometry, and silence. Elias began cross-referencing this with Kabbalistic teachings, specifically, the Tree of Life, composed of 10 sephirot, divine emanations, linked by 22 paths, which corresponded eerily to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. When overlaid onto Genesis chapter 1, the alignment was stunning, each day of creation mapped to a movement along the tree. This wasn't storytelling, it was a divine schematic. He needed more. He emailed his old professor from Oxford, Dr. Rachel Hadassah, an expert in Semitic languages and mystical symbology. They hadn't spoken in years, not since a debate where he challenged the historical accuracy of Revelation and she'd stormed out of his lecture. The subject line of his email was simple: Tavnit Elohim, I need to speak. He barely slept that night. By morning, her reply was waiting. I thought you'd never ask. There are things I couldn't publish. Come to Jerusalem. I'll show you what the Vatican wouldn't let me reveal. Jerusalem, the very name sent chills down his spine. The city where history folds over itself in layers of myth, war, blood, and faith. Within a week, Elias was on a plane, journal in his backpack, heart pounding, at the Hebrew University, under the dry sun and whispers of wind that had kissed the stones of prophets and kings. Elias finally met Rachel again. She hadn't aged a day. Her eyes burned brighter than ever. She handed him a small scroll, sealed with red wax and an ancient insignia, the Tetragrammaton. YHWH. This was found hidden beneath the dome of the rock. During a sanctioned excavation that was quickly shut down, it contains a fragment of text that speaks of the architect of the worlds. The language is pre-Hebrew, almost Proto-Aramaic, but the symbols match what you found in your grandfather's journal. Elias's hands trembled as he unrolled the scroll. The letters weren't just text, they were geometry. Each line, angled like the architecture of a temple. Inside one of the symbols, he spotted something that made him gasp. A spiral, the golden ratio, burned into the ancient parchment. Rachel leaned in. This isn't just scripture, Elias. This is engineering, sacred design. Look closer. He stared. At the center of the symbol was a shape, a hexagon. 6 points, 6 days of creation. And surrounding it, a circle. The seventh day, completion, wholeness, Sabbath. His mind raced. What if the days of creation weren't literal time frames, but dimensions? Stages of manifestation? And what if, by understanding these symbols, humans could tap into the very structure of reality, rewrite the way we live? Build, think, this isn't religion, he whispered. It's architecture, divine architecture. Rachel nodded. We are made in his image. Yes, but perhaps the image isn't physical. It's structural, encoded into our consciousness. Suddenly, everything made sense, and everything fell apart. If the Bible was a blueprint, then what were we building? And more importantly, who else knew? The next morning, Elias and Rachel stood at the edge of the old city of Jerusalem. The sun casting golden light over stones older than memory. Their destination, a restricted archive beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Accessible only through Rachel's Vatican research credentials. As they walked through winding corridors, Rachel explained, what I'm about to show you was never meant to see the light of day. It's part of the original architectural plan of Solomon's temple, but not the public version. This one was encoded. They arrived at a sealed door carved with ancient Hebrew glyphs and geometric figures. Rachel inserted an iron key, decorated with a 6-pointed star intersecting a spiral, and with a groan of stone. The door opened. Inside was a chamber no larger than a chapel, lined with manuscripts, stone tablets, and glowing diagrams etched onto the walls in golden pigment. Elias stood frozen, eyes darting from one symbol to another. At the center of the room, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight from an unseen opening above, was a circular stone altar. Inscribed upon it was the flower of life, a pattern of overlapping circles considered by many mystics to be the blueprint of all existence. Rachel pointed at it. This symbol predates Judaism, Christianity, even Egypt. But here's the thing, every major sacred text contains hidden numerical structures that align with it. The Bible, its encoded geometry. Elias stepped closer. The pattern was mesmerizing. The longer he stared, the more it seemed to breathe, shifting, alive. And then he noticed something. Nestled within the flower of life were 10 larger nodes, mirroring the tree of life from Kabbalah. But each node contained a unique biblical verse in Hebrew. One caught his attention. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. It was positioned at the first node, Keter, the crown, source of divine energy. Another verse aligned with Teferet, the heart, and God saw that it was good. Suddenly it clicked. The 10 Sephirot were emotional and creative forces, and each matched a creation verse. The deeper message was that creation wasn't just external, it was a spiritual blueprint for the human soul. This isn't just how the world was made. Elias whispered, it's how we're supposed to build ourselves. Rachel smiled. Exactly, and it goes further. She led him to a tablet made of polished obsidian, etched with silver lines forming a triangle within a circle, inside which were 3 names in Hebrew: Elohim, El Shaddai, and YHWH. These are the 3 aspects of God used at key turning points in Genesis. The triangle represents triune balance, creation, sustenance, and judgment. But look closer. Elias did, and noticed a strange detail. The lines of the triangle extended beyond the circle, intersecting with a larger structure painted on the wall behind it, a cube. Rachel continued, this cube is called Metatron's cube. It contains all 5 platonic solids, the shapes that make up the structure of every atom, every element, every biological form. The ancients believed these shapes were the language of God. Elias traced the cube's lines with his finger. It was sacred architecture, a design embedded in both matter and scripture. Suddenly he understood. The tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, even the dimensions of Noah's Ark, all were built using ratios and forms that aligned with this divine geometry. These weren't just buildings, he said, they were gateways. Rachel nodded, and some believe they still are, that certain proportions and symbols can tune a space or even a mind, like a key in a lock. That's why the Vatican locked this away. Imagine what would happen if the world understood that God's design could be reverse engineered. Elias was stunned. You're saying these symbols aren't just metaphor, they're functional? Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, and I've seen him work. She walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a thin codex titled in Latin, Ratio Divina, Loci Portarum, the divine ratio, places of the gates. Inside were diagrams of ancient sites, Stonehenge, Giza, Machu Picchu, even Angkor Wat, each overlaid with identical geometric blueprints. A hidden grid, a planetary scale architecture. These sites, Rachel explained, aren't randomly placed. They sit on energy points, nodes of a global lattice. And when activated through symbol, sound, or consciousness, they respond. Elias felt the room spinning. All his life he believed the Bible was a text to be understood, but now he realized it was also a map, a code, and maybe even a machine. Why now? He asked. Why am I only discovering this now? Rachel handed him a page torn from an old Hebrew calendar. The date was circled in red, 2024 Jubilee year. She said quietly, the ancients believed that every 49 years, the world passed through a narrow gate, a moment where heaven and earth aligned. The next one is in 3 months. If you want to complete your grandfather's work, that's when the blueprint activates. 3 weeks later, Elias stood beneath the merciless Egyptian sun, gazing up at the worn, wind-scarred face of the Great Pyramid of Giza. But he wasn't here for the pyramid. He was here for something deeper, something buried, lost to time, deliberately hidden. Rachel had stayed in Jerusalem to decode more manuscripts. But she had arranged for him to meet a contact, Youssef Amin, an Egyptologist with access to restricted dig sites and, more importantly, a strong belief that Egypt's ancient structures were more than mere tombs. Youssef, lean and weathered, met Elias near the Sphinx, where tourists buzzed about with cameras. But he led Elias quietly through a fenced passage and into a small stone opening, a hidden shaft beneath the Sphinx's paw. Sealed to the public, there's a chamber under here, Youssef whispered, flashlight in hand. The government won't admit it, but we found it years ago. The strange part is, it's not Egyptian in style. The inscriptions match Hebrew and Sumerian characters. The tunnel descended steeply into the earth, the walls narrowing with every step. After 15 minutes a tense descent, they reached a vaulted chamber dimly lit by Youssef's torch. The air was cold and dry, and the scent of ancient stone filled Elias's lungs. Then he saw it. At the center of the chamber was a pillar, perhaps 8 feet tall, covered in spiraling etchings, symbols from the book of Genesis, Kabbalistic diagrams, and cuneiform from Mesopotamia. But what struck him most was a large symbol at its base, a 6-pointed star interlocked with a tetrahedron, a 3D Star of David, resting inside a circle of Hebrew text. Youssef said, we call it the Pillar of the Covenant, but that's not its original name. The older texts refer to it as the Axis of Light. Elias stepped closer. The Hebrew inscription read, Et Hor Haganaz, the hidden light. His heart skipped a beat. That phrase was referenced only once in ancient mystical texts. It referred to the primordial light, the original illumination that God created before the sun and stars, a spiritual energy hidden away after the fall of man. As he ran his fingers over the symbol, the pillar gave off a low, resonant hum. Startled, Elias backed away. "It's been doing that since we uncovered it," Yusef said, lowering his voice, "but only when people like you touch it." Elias looked at him. "What do you mean, people like me?" Yusef pulled a small stone tablet from his satchel. On it was an etching of a figure, a man, with the same spiraling symbol etched into his palm. Underneath it was a line of Proto-Hebrew text that read, "When the seeker bears the mark of pattern, the blueprint shall awaken." Elias froze. His grandfather's journal had a similar symbol on the cover, etched faintly into the leather. Was that the mark? Was he chosen? He stepped back to the pillar and placed his hand directly over the center of the six-pointed star. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, lines of light began to travel up from the symbol, illuminating the spiral carvings as if the pillar were alive. The hum grew louder, the chamber vibrated gently. Then, with a sudden flash, a hidden panel on the wall slid open, revealing a niche. Inside it was a crystalline tablet, shaped like a cube, with symbols shifting across its surface as if written in liquid fire. Yusef whispered, "This is what the old texts called the Luz stone, the fragment of divine code." The same name used for the indestructible bone in the human spine said to contain all memory of the body. Some say it's how resurrection happens. Elias took the stone gently. It was cold, but pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat. As he held it, images flooded his mind, not visions exactly, but impressions: a tower of golden light, a labyrinth beneath Jerusalem, and a circle of 12 figures standing around a cube of fire. And then a voice, not external, but within, clear, calm, and ancient. "The pattern is not just written, it is lived, and you must walk it." He stumbled back, overwhelmed. Yusef steadied him. "You saw something." Elias nodded. "It's not just a blueprint for buildings. It's a template for human evolution, a code to awaken the divine within us." He looked back at the pillar, then at the stone in his hand. If this was the first key, then more were waiting, and he knew where he had to go next. "There's a sequence," Elias murmured. "Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, each book, a layer. And the real map, it's hidden between the lines." Yusef smiled. "Then you must follow it. But beware, you're not the only one looking for the pattern." Elias's heart sank. He had suspected as much. Something this powerful would attract others, those who wanted to control, not understand. As they made their way back up through the tunnel, Elias clutched the Luz stone, feeling the weight of its message. The divine blueprint was real, and it was awakening. The Sinai desert was a scorched, wind-swept expanse where time seemed to pause. Elias stepped off the rusted Land Rover with his satchel over his shoulder. The Luz stone wrapped tightly in linen and nestled safely inside. He was accompanied now by a new guide, Nadim, a Bedouin scholar whose tribe had passed down oral stories about the mountain and its pillar of flame for generations. They had been hiking for hours under the oppressive sun when Nadim pointed toward a narrow ravine carved into the red cliffs. "There," he said, "that's the Valley of Smoke. The elders say it leads to the place where the sky burned without fire." Elias's heart quickened. He remembered the verse from Exodus. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. Most dismissed it as metaphor or divine miracle. But Elias, armed with the blueprint, knew better. Symbols weren't metaphor, they were instruction. As they descended into the ravine, the air grew cooler, more still. The rock faces were etched with faded carvings, spirals, stars, and angular glyphs that didn't belong to any known script. Elias paused at one, recognizing a shape from the flower of life. He traced it gently. The stone beneath his fingers vibrated. The pattern responds to resonance. He thought, not just touch, sound. He remembered something Rachel had mentioned in Jerusalem, that certain Hebrew verses, when chanted in precise frequency, could unlock encoded sights. He opened the Luz stone, now glowing faintly, and found the verse. Exodus chapter 13 verse 21, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud." He recited the verse aloud in ancient Hebrew, using a soft, melodic tone, as his voice echoed through the ravine. The glyph beneath his hand shimmered, then dissolved into dust, revealing a hidden passage carved into the rock. Nadim stepped back, whispering, "You carry old power." Inside, the passage opened into a chamber, much larger than it had any right to be. Carved with impossible precision, the walls glowed faintly, embedded with lines of electrum and crystal, forming conduits in the shape of Hebrew letters, each linked to a verse from the book of Exodus. At the center of the chamber stood an enormous crystalline monolith, floating slightly above a circular dais. It pulsed with a soft golden light. The base was surrounded by 6 triangular plates, each etched with a Hebrew letter and a number. Aleph, 1, Bet, 2, Gimel, 3, up to Vav, 6. Elias realized this wasn't just a monument. It was a device, or perhaps an interface. He studied the plates and remembered the structure of Genesis, 6 days of creation, and the 7th, the day of rest, hidden in the center. He stepped forward and placed the Luz stone on the central dais. It fit perfectly into a shallow recess. The chamber dimmed. Then, a beam of coherent light shot upward from the monolith, refracting across the crystal-lined ceiling and projecting a holographic map of the Sinai desert, overlaid with nodes and lines forming a giant geometric grid. "This is the true Exodus," Elias whispered, "not just a path through the desert, but a path through consciousness." Each node on the map aligned with historical locations: Marah, Elam, Rephidim, Mount Sinai, but when viewed through the geometric overlay, they formed a Merkabah, the mystical chariot structure described in Ezekiel's vision. Nadim watched in awe. Our ancestors said the pillar of fire wasn't from this world, that it was a presence, a light that made the air sing. Elias turned to him. It was energy, tuned to sacred frequency. When activated through symbol and sound, it became visible, just like the burning bush. The realization hit him hard. The pillar of fire was not an illusion. It was the activation of a frequency field, enabled by the symbols of the blueprint. And that meant it could be reactivated. But there was more. At the edge of the chamber stood a stone table. Upon it lay a scroll sealed with black wax and the Hebrew letters, Pei, Resh, Shin. Together they formed the word, perish, meaning interpretation or separation. He broke the seal. Inside was a prophecy, written in faded ink. When the pattern returns to Sinai, and light walks in flesh, the fire shall rise again to mark the path. But beware, those who seek control over the flame shall be consumed by it. Elias stepped back, chilled despite the desert heat. This wasn't just knowledge, it was a warning. As they exited the chamber, the map still flickering in his mind, Elias turned to Nadim. "There are others looking for this," he said quietly, "and they don't want to awaken it, they want to own it." Nadim nodded. "Then you must go where they cannot. To the next place." Elias checked the map. The next node aligned with Mount Nebo, in Jordan, the site where Moses saw the promised land but never entered. And more importantly, the place where some believed the Ark of the Covenant had been hidden. He didn't know what waited there, but he knew the pattern was unfolding, and he was walking inside it. Elias stood atop Mount Nebo, where the winds whispered ancient secrets. The sky was clear, stretching endlessly toward the horizon where the Jordan Valley lay, shimmering under the sun. This was the place where, according to the Bible, Moses stood to behold the promised land, yet was not allowed to enter. But Elias wasn't here for history. He was here for what lay beneath it. According to the encoded map from the Sinai chamber, Mount Nebo was more than a lookout point. It was a final node in the divine blueprint. A convergence of frequencies, symbols, and memory, and possibly, the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. The site was mostly quiet. A few pilgrims wandered nearby, visiting the mosaic-filled basilica that honored Moses. But Elias moved past the official site and toward a fenced area marked excavation restricted. Waiting there, as promised, was Father Marco Leonetti, a Jesuit archaeologist from the Vatican who had quietly helped Rachel in Jerusalem. He wore simple desert robes and carried a small leather case. "You're late," he said, but with a smile. Elias bowed slightly. "Time bends when you follow divine geometry." Marco's face twitched with curiosity. "I take it you found the Luz stone." Elias nodded and retrieved it from his satchel. The stone glowed faintly as if it recognized the sacred ground beneath them. Marco turned serious. "There's a chamber below this hill, untouched for thousands of years. We believe it was carved not by Israelites, but by pre-Abrahamic priest scientists, guardians of the original covenant. They didn't call it the Ark, they called it the resonator. Elias blinked. Resonator? Marco motioned him forward. Come, see for yourself. They descended through a hidden entrance beneath a cracked olive tree, crawling down narrow stone steps carved at unnatural angles. The walls were etched not with Hebrew, but with symbols that pulsed in a sequence, geometric patterns that reminded Elias of both DNA strands and electrical circuits. At last, they entered a chamber unlike anything Elias had seen. The walls curved inward, forming a dome of polished basalt, covered in layers of gold leaf and crystal inlays. In the center rested a rectangular object on a low platform. It was about the size of a small coffin, covered in ornate carvings, gold, and strange nodal points at each corner. There it was, the Ark, but not the one depicted in paintings or Hollywood movies. This Ark was technological, yet sacred. No angels with wings, no rods for carrying, just pure, sacred symmetry. Around the base were 6 inscriptions, each a verse from Exodus and Leviticus. Encoded in gematria, the numerical system where Hebrew letters correspond to numbers. Each verse, Marco said, is a frequency, a prayer, or a command. He stepped forward and pressed his palm to a golden sigil on the surface. A hum filled the chamber. Then, lines of light traced across the Ark, and a low tone rang out, clear and resonant. Like a tuning fork vibrating through the soul. Elias staggered slightly. His thoughts slowed. His breath matched the rhythm of the sound. He wasn't hearing the Ark. He was synchronizing with it. Then it happened. The dome above flickered, and an image appeared, not projected light, but pure thought, a vision, not through the eyes but through the soul. He saw a spiral of galaxies, with Hebrew letters orbiting like planets. A man standing in a desert, raising a rod of light toward the heavens. A temple, not in stone, but made of sound and light, rising from the ground. 12 figures gathered around a pulsating cube, chanting in harmony, and in the center of it all, the tree of life, its branches not made of wood, but geometry. When the vision faded, Elias fell to his knees, trembling. This isn't just a relic, he whispered. It's a communication device, a consciousness amplifier. The Ark wasn't built to carry laws. It was built to carry presence. Marco nodded. Some say it was used to speak with God, others, to become like God. But only those who are attuned can survive its field. That's why it was hidden. Elias stood slowly, his body still humming. The blueprint, it leads here. But this isn't the end, is it? Marco opened his leather case and revealed a parchment, ancient, cracked, written in Hebrew and Aramaic. This is the final fragment, the one Rachel couldn't find. It describes what comes after. Elias read, when the one who bears the pattern awakens the voice of the Ark, and the stones remember the word, then shall the temple not made with hands arise, and light shall speak through man again. He looked at Marco. The temple not made with hands. It's us, humanity, our consciousness. Marco's voice was steady. That's what the blueprint has always been. A guide, not to build a place, but to become one. Outside, the winds of Mount Nebo howled louder, and clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming, not of rain, but of revelation. Elias knew the world was about to change. Some would awaken, others would resist, but the divine pattern was no longer hidden. It had chosen to rise. Through him, the storm came just before dusk. Dark clouds coiled above Mount Nebo, and lightning danced like ancient serpents across the sky. Elias stood alone on the edge of the cliff, overlooking the Jordan Valley, his hands trembling, the Luz stone pulsing in his palm. Behind him, the chamber that housed the Ark was sealed once more. Rachel's voice came through the comm device, crackling, Elias, they've found us. You have to move, now. But he didn't move, not yet. He stared into the distance, feeling something stir inside him, not fear, not even courage, something older, a memory not his own. As if the blueprint was awakening within him, not just around him. He had spent months chasing fragments, scripture, geometry, prophecy, but it wasn't until he stood before the Ark that he understood the truth. The blueprint wasn't something to be decoded. It was something to be embodied. And now, the world wanted it. A sleek black helicopter broke through the clouds. It hovered above the ridge, whipping the sand into wild spirals. A team of black-clad operatives disembarked, members of the Order of Orion, a secret organization Elias had only heard whispers of. They were known not for their faith, but their obsession with control and their thirst for divine technology. Their leader stepped forward, a tall woman in a silver coat with eyes like mercury. She carried herself like a queen among ghosts. "Elias Moreno," she said, her voice slicing through the wind. "You've found it, the final node, the key to the pattern." Elias didn't answer. The Luz stone glowed hotter in his hand. "We don't want to destroy it," she continued. "We want to perfect it. You've seen what the Ark can do. Imagine what it could be, with our reach, our resources. No more chaos, no more war, just perfect order." Elias laughed softly. "You want to become gods?" She tilted her head. "Don't you?" He shook his head. "The blueprint isn't a throne. It's a mirror." She frowned. "Then you're not ready." She raised her hand. A sniper on the ridge took aim. But before the trigger could be pulled, the ground beneath him pulsed, a deep hum rising from the earth. Matching the resonance of the Luz stone, the wind shifted direction, swirling around Elias in a spiral of golden dust, forming patterns, circles, lines. The tree of life, the flower of life, ancient geometries of divine origin. The Ark, though buried, was awakening. And through it, so was Elias. His voice emerged, not his own, but fuller, deeper, layered in tone. Words ancient and new flowed from him like song and thunder. "You cannot possess what was never yours. You cannot dominate what was made to unify. The light is not a weapon, it is a seed, and it grows only in freedom." The operatives faltered, their weapons trembled in their hands. The leader's eyes narrowed. "So you choose faith over function?" "No," Elias said, stepping forward, the Luz stone now floating above his hand. Spinning, "I choose harmony." He pressed his palm to his heart. The blueprint ignited within him. In an instant, the symbols of Genesis, Exodus, and all the books of Moses unfolded in radiant light across his skin, forming living maps of energy, blueprints of stars, DNA strands, and temples not built by human hands. And then, with a final breath, Elias whispered, "Let there be light." The mountaintop exploded in brilliance. Not fire, not force, but frequency, a field of sacred resonance that rippled across the valley. Through the earth, into hearts, the order was thrown back by the sheer force, not of violence, but of truth. Their machines shorted, their minds recoiled, the mountain itself seemed to sigh. When the light faded, Elias was gone, but his echo remained. Weeks later, Rachel stood before the United Nations Assembly, holding a digital version of the blueprint decoded from Elias's final transmission. She was not there to preach, but to share. "This isn't about religion," she said to the world. "It's about resonance. We were built with intention. A divine architecture runs through everything, from the stars to our breath. The blueprint isn't a secret to be hidden or sold. It's an invitation to awaken, to become." Across the globe, people reported strange dreams, visions of symbols, temples of light, and trees with roots in heaven. Children began drawing geometries they had never learned. Musicians began composing melodies aligned with sacred ratios. Architects began to build differently. Humanity wasn't changing by force. It was changing by memory, by design. Final scene, in a quiet village nestled between the mountains of Peru. An old man sat beneath a fig tree, watching a child draw patterns in the dust. "Where did you learn that?" he asked gently. The boy smiled. "I didn't learn it, I just remembered." Far above them, the stars aligned, not by accident, but by rhythm. And in the silence between the stars, something pulsed, not an end, but a beginning. The divine blueprint was not a mystery to be solved. It was a song waiting to be sung. And finally, humanity was learning the tune.